Jonas Schnelli, Sheep Among Wolves, Bitcoin core developer, and a personal hero of mine. Everyone knows that Bitcoiners are carnivores and Ethereum people are vegans. So, my question to you is why don't you work on Ethereum?
Yeah, it's a good question. Sometimes it looks like that, but I think it's the loud people on Twitter. It's probably not the truth.
Yeah, that might be something to it. But seriously, why don't you work on Ethereum? Like, jokes aside.
Yeah, so maybe first let's add a disclaimer. I'm not a nutritionist. I have no health care expertise. But what I did in the past 20 years was like analyzing the field of nutrition, health in general, from a very neutral standpoint with a scientific approach. And so all the papers and all the informations I gathered, I came to the conclusion that a carnivore diet is far away from the best long-term health. So that's why I try to stay away. And that's also why I inform people that think twice if you go on a high animal-based keto diet, if that is really beneficial to you.
Okay, you came to that conclusion based on what?
So there's multiple points. There's, of course, people usually quickly focus on short-term health, like how I feel. But then there's also the aspect of long-term health, how I will feel in 20, 30, 40 years. And I came to the conclusion mostly because I looked at what's actually killing us. And killer number one is still CVD, cardiovascular disease. This is killer number one in most states, most countries. So it's a top priority to eliminate that one. And there's multiple ways how you can affect or how you can reduce the risk for cardiovascular disease. But one really important aspect is keeping your lipids, keeping your fat profile, your cholesterol profile in check. And going on a high saturated fat diet is just not going to reduce that risk. And of course, then, and there's the big question at the beginning, do you trust science or not? And if you don't trust science, you're lost anyways. And I trust the process of science so that people come to conclusions and challenge ideas and come up with new ideas. But at the end, there's kind of a weight that pulls science or pulls the truth in a certain direction, and listening to that seems to be the most logical step to to find your own truth.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay, so two things here. Firstly, high saturated fat diet is, in my belief system, is at the very best, it's neutral, but definitely not a good thing that you're doing that. Okay, let me draw an equivalency in the vegan world, because what you can do in the vegan world is that you go real high on carbohydrates, right? Starchy, empty carbohydrates. That would be the equivalent on the carnivore world of you go real high on the saturated fat. So far, do you agree on that assessment that high carb, starchy, empty carb diet is as unideal as high saturated fat diet?
It's a good point, and there's some truth to it. It always depends on the carbs. If you look at the science, if you say you are on a high saturated fat diet and then you replace your fatty stuff with refined carbohydrates, sugars, white pastas.
So yeah, sugar. Let's go with
Just
sugar.
if you replace saturated fat with, white refined grains, with sugar, with, a lot of processed foods, you're not going to be better off. So maybe you even would be better off by having a saturated fat diet. But then it always boils down to, you cannot say, if I reduce my saturated fat, I'm better. It always depends, where are the calories coming from that you replace it with. And of course, if you replace saturated fat, animal-based foods with like very nutritious plant-based foods like tofu, tempeh, vegetables, green leafy vegetables. It could also be whole grains, seeds, nuts. There is a lot of evidence that you are going to be better off in the long term. Also on top, all the saturated fat-based animal foods come with almost no fiber. They are nutritious. There's absolutely space for having saturated fats and having animal products if you want them. But you have to make sure you're getting enough fiber. And most animal-based foods have very little fiber.
Have you heard about the forgotten case of animal fiber?
No.
So it was a study recently made some waves that there were cheetahs, and one group of cheetah was getting the meat only, and the other group of cheetahs were getting the entire bunny or whatnot. And turns out the cheetahs, those were getting the entire bunny, were much healthier because they were eating the bones, the cartilages, and whatnot. They call this the animal fiber. Anyway,
So you have to eat also the skin and, the fur, and then maybe you get the fiber.
I don't know. I don't
I
know
kind of
about
prefer
the skin.
I prefer to eat the whole grain bread and a few broccolis and veg and fruits, but depends on your taste.
So I think we don't have any disagreements so far. But what happens when, in my book, we fix the saturated fat issue and start to eat leaner meat? Is there any issue with that other than a philosophical one?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to eat animal products, of course, I would then suggest that you stick to the leaner meats, especially fatty fish and, maybe chicken or something like that. I would probably stay away from red meat, also because of other downsides to it. But of course, the leaner, the less fatty the piece of meat is, probably the better. But then there is the question, of course, how much, again, the fiber issue. And then what could be even better than fatty fish and chicken? So is there anything that would improve your health further or deeper than just eating animal products? And my conclusion is there's like better foods for long-term health that have similar benefits than a chicken breast or a fatty fish.
What about how do you contend with the lack of fish oils, lack of omega-3s in a vegan diet? Or you don't at all?
Yeah, of course, omega-3s are really an important part. And how I do it is I just make sure I get algae oil, omega-3 DHA, EPA algae
Mm.
oil. I get that in capsule form. And because if you want to reach the optimal omega-3 levels with animal products, with fatty fish, you have to eat a lot of fatty fish. Basically at least every second day, you gotta eat a half salmon or so. So you have to calculate it. Don't take my words, but you have to look it up. If you need basically above 1 gram of EPA DHA combined per day to have optimal health. And it's really hard without supplementation.
I think even the 1 gram doesn't even hit the close to the target values, right? I think
Yeah.
8%.
But you're
So I'm
right.
taking around 7 big fish oil capsules, right? Like, and I barely hit the the mean when I doing the blood test.
Same for me. I'm currently at 2 grams of EPA DHA per day, and it gets me into a good range. And of course, we can touch on later. Then there's the whole philosophical, ethical aspect of why I prefer plant-based products over animal-based products. And for me, it's a spiritual point, but health has also to do with how you feel mentally, right? So this is an important point we can maybe touch on later. But first, let's stick to the pure nutrition.
Okay. Before we get onto that, the last topic that I actually feel strongly about, which is the only side effect of protein is greatness. Reflect on that, please.
Yeah, so people assumed for many years, maybe still do, that a lot of protein can have negative effects. It can have liver damage or toxicity, but I think that's not true. We don't know the whole picture yet, but I think there's hardly any evidence that too much protein is bad for you. But there are some studies where very high intake of protein did lower testosterone levels in males. So could also be of the products that were associated with high protein. If you had to eat a lot of steak, maybe there's some hormonal issues with that too. But then there's an important point about optimal protein and maximal protein. So if you go for maximal protein, which is like, you get to the 2 grams per kilogram body weight, you're just maxing out your protein metabolism. and it's not in an optimal setting. So, which means if you ever go lower on protein, if you go into a fasting or if you change your diet, your metabolism is not very efficiently protein because it's used to have maximal protein. So there's some nuance, but if you just want to don't deal with it, probably go with maximal protein. It's really important, and especially if you're on a plant-based diet, it's a really huge important point.
You see, I also want to know that at my weight, maximal protein doesn't work because like that's a lot of protein, like so much that I cannot eat that much, right? And I eat a lot of protein, but better calculations are if you're adjusting to your lean body mass, right?
Yeah, it's always, I think if you go to the science recommends 1.6 gram per lean body mass kilogram, but no one knows their lean body mass except you're going into a DEXA scan. So if you do a DEXA scan and if you have the right measurements, you can probably figure out your lean body mass and then calculate from there. But most people don't know it, so they just go. If you're like overweight and you have a lot of fat tissue, then you probably can lower the amount of protein calculated by kilogram of body weight. But just make sure
See,
you're,
in the DEXA,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
even the DEXA scan gets a bit murky there because previously people were measuring it with calipers, right? And the DEXA scan is consistently showing 5% or 6% more body fat than the calipers were showing, and the recommendations were adjusted for were doing calipers, so it gets
That's a good point. I wasn't aware, but I think I would probably rather overshoot on protein than undershoot. But of course, then the question is, how do you get the food in? Right? The protein is, in my opinion, an easy problem or easy to solve problem.
Okay. So you're vegan, right? Or vegetarian?
Yeah, there's a lot of definitions. So there's like plant-based diets, vegan, vegetarians. Everything is different. So I'm consider myself a vegan, which means it's mostly an ethical animal welfare position. And then some people call themselves plant-based. That's just the diet aspect of veganism. Veganism goes beyond leather and different products made from animals. And then there's the vegetarians, or it's kind of a vague term, but it mostly includes not eating meat, some not eating fish, but they certainly still eat dairy products. So this is kind of the definition. And veganism doesn't mean always to avoid all animal products. It avoids it. The idea is to avoid them as much as possible, to not negatively impact your own health. So if you need an egg a day, you probably could still say I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan eating an egg a day. Of course, it gets a bit crazy, but if you're having health problem without that egg, it will be justified, and still you could still call yourself a vegan. However, I'm not eating any animal products since 12 years.
There is a continuity of consciousness here. Let's start with humans, and we're going to monkeys, other mammals, people in the water, people, fish in the water, and we end up with insects, right? Which are almost like automatons in some sense, but also there are like microorganisms, right? Like you don't have problem with eating microorganisms because they are so not conscious that it's crazy how unconscious they are. But the plants are on that scale as well. So what you're eating are plants and microorganisms, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Or
Yeah, that's correct.
did you ever think about it this way?
Oh, of course. I was also confronted with all the arguments over the years, and the plants have feelings too, arguments. Of course, it's not a strict line. Consciousness or life forms, it's a continuum. Like, is a plant alive or not? There's a definition question. But the thing for me is inflicting pain on other life forms. That's mostly my point. And if an animal, it can feel pain, has a central nervous system, has a brain that can, sense pain. There for me, it's really unquestionable that one should avoid this, because life is one thing, and if I have to inflict pain on an animal or on another life form, I have to do it, but I'm not like consciously doing it for pleasure. So I would never like go to a dog outside here and just kick it out for pleasure. So why should I eat a piece of meat just for pleasure and kill an animal? So if I need to survive, I would do it totally. But for me, there's no question to avoid inflicting pain on all life forms.
So it sounds to me you're talking about minimizing suffering. Well, let me confront you with meat in a lab, right? Meat made in a laboratory. It sounds like something that's even switching to a meat in a laboratory makes you even inflict less suffering on other organisms.
Yeah, totally. So lab meat, I probably would consider it vegan. Depends how the amino acids used for the mad libs lab meats are sourced. But if it's purely, synthetically produced, it could probably call itself it's vegan, right? But then the question is still there, why would you eat it? Of course, maybe for pleasure, then okay, too. Then go with it. But if is it more nutritional than other things? That's then the question. But I think you can produce lab meat that's totally within the vegan philosophy.
Okay, okay. Speaking of plants, have you seen Leaf Erikson?
No?
No? Rosselbrecht. First picture
That
when he
okay.
came out.
Oh, that has a name. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
See, people keep
try to Leaf Erikson. That's like my favorite plant now. I want to come back to these topics. But, we are Bitcoiners here, so we have to talk about Bitcoin, right? And I actually do have questions to you
Mhm.
about Bitcoin. Let me just give you a little story of where I know you. I was working on Wasabi Wallet, which is a privacy focused Bitcoin wallet. And the first hardest thing to solve was that how do you create a somewhat light wallet that doesn't compromises your privacy on the network level? And Jonas was the first person who actually started working in this direction, and you created the pull request to Bitcoin Core about a full block SPV wallet. But but your pull request didn't get merged, even though there were a lot of reviews and stuff. And the question here is that what's going on with Bitcoin Core when something so obviously useful, not touching the consensus code, just doesn't get merged? Like everyone is afraid to push the merge button. You might have more insight on that.
Yeah, I have more insight. Yeah. So it was not up to anyone else except me that the pull request was not merged. I just didn't complete it. It was not ready to be merged. But I think it was just my energy that was not there to push it through and get it merged, because it's a complex change. It also affects a lot of peer-to-peer code. And it's huge, the change to do full block SPV. I tried then later on with smaller steps, but it needs multi-years of work probably to get it into a project like Bitcoin Core. But now it's a bit better because the wallet and the user interface has been split off. But it was no one's fault except mine, because it just needs more energy than I had to bring it through. And of course, there's still downsides to the full block SPV. You have no mempool, so you cannot actually figure out who's paying you before it actually enters the block, or it's harder. And of course, there's still the bandwidth issue. You have to download every block at some point. But there's a lot of, maybe I haven't followed the landscape, but I'm still like surprised how little effort there has been made to do light clients, either with block filters on 5.8, there's a lot of, I think it's probably some people implemented it, and I'm just not aware, but there's a lot of opportunity to have light clients. but somehow either people gave up or there's other things that are more interesting.
Yeah, thanks for the insight on that part. I can give you the insight on your questions. So regarding the mempool stuff, I was able to solve it in a best effort basis that, the first transaction that comes to the mempool is considered to be the valid one and so on. But so I was listening to the mempool and that worked. What else? Um, regarding you said you still have to download the entire blockchain, but you don't. What you did.
Yeah, well, the implementation I made was a hybrid mode. So the idea is, I mean, one of the big problems of running a full node is assume you start Bitcoin Core for the first time and you want to use it immediately, but you can't because it needs to sync first up to the newest block before it actually shows you a transaction. The idea was that you actually do the opposite. So you basically start at where your wallet was created, which is now, right? So it's the newest block. All older blocks cannot affect your wallet. You could immediately use it. And in the meantime, it would download all the blocks in the background. And while you use it in a light client mode, it would slowly emerge to a full node. Of course, you could then only kind of just always run it in the light client mode, which would only download the blocks from where your wallet timestamp has been. And then you could use the block filters to only download the blocks that have relevance to your wallet. But block filters were not present back in the day when I did that.
I thought you only did the hybrid mode is because you were afraid it's not going to get merged if you're not doing that.
Not really. I think it was just, it would have been the cleverest way because Bitcoin Core has the potential to run as a full node, and people actually should run a full node if they can. And if you can use it, and in the background it uses the CPU and the disk whenever you have available resources, and you slowly get the full node running under the hood. Of course, it could be pruned, which means it only has a few gigabytes of space requirements. That would be, in my case, the best scenario. So you have a light client during the sync, and once it's in sync, you have a full node. And once, I mean, people don't know, but once your prunes or whatever full node is in sync, it uses only a little CPU. It uses, I once measured it, it uses way less CPU power than Slack, the chat application. Of course, bandwidth might be an issue, but, a megabyte or two every 10 minutes is actually not a big deal.
Okay, I built it by myself in C# for Wasabi. And that was the very first version of Wasabi, not even the first one, alpha, beta, whatever you call it. But then the Lightning Network developers came out, and you alluded to it, the client-side filtering stuff. And why didn't get adopted, right? Like, finally, we have a Bitcoin wallet that's private, at least on that level, and we did it that way. But not even people who were supposed to be privacy wallet, right? Samurai wallet wasn't even doing that. So that was a bit crazy. It seems people don't care about privacy that much.
Yeah.
And even if you do,
Go ahead.
even if you do and you become successful, then you're going to end up in trouble because that's the political climate today.
Yeah, I think people, of course, privacy in Bitcoin, and there's some legal pushback, but I think, privacy on the network side is totally possible. It's just there's not enough people working on it. That was always my feeling. There's just not enough people interested to bring this forward. There's more interesting things to do, and it's really hard. Working on Bitcoin software is really complicated. A, you need to have a deep skill set of programming. B, it's hard to get funding. It's not a shitcoin project where people just throw money at you. And yeah, there's just not enough people. That was always my feeling. It was never about, people are controlling it and they don't want this and that. It never came to my mind that this could have been the situation.
What do you do now in Bitcoin?
I stopped working on Bitcoin Core. I also stopped following it development in deep details. I still follow it kind of from a high level, but right now I'm not too much interested in working on anything that's Bitcoin related. I have kind of a funny side project I'm doing, but the rest of my time, I spend time with my family, and sports, health. That's my current focus.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. I'm doing the same. Okay, well, kind of sad that some of us got disillusioned from Bitcoin. Other one, it's probably from different reasons. My disillusionment comes from the regulatory environment, and that all my competitors are in jail. Like. But where does yours coming from?
Yeah, I totally see your point. You were in a space that's really under high scrutiny from governments. So I would also be verify, or I would also be reluctant to work in that field. I mean, the side note there, I think privacy should probably happen on a protocol level rather than with sites, like mixing and stuff, because it's the anonymity set and the developers are just under scrutiny. So if we get more privacy on the protocol level, which we slowly get with Taproot and whatnot, I think that's the way forward. And yeah, so I totally get the point why people are afraid. My position was more lack of motivation, and that was my main driver. I was just not that motivated anymore on my health journey. I just found so much joy in doing other things than sitting on the PC. And secondly, of course, the legal attacks I got at the end of my Bitcoin core time.
Tell me about the legal attacks.
It was just the Craig Wright case, where he was attacking all the core developers that at that time. It was kind of scary to get for 2 weeks every day. The postman rang the bell, handed me over a big pile of legal documents under special postal codes I had to sign every day for 2 weeks. And until I had like a few kilograms of documents, and the spies were looking up where I live and stuff. So it was a bit scary, and but it turned out in a good way for us. But it could have been different.
Is he on the run now, Craig Wright?
So I don't
He's
know.
in the run.
Could be. I don't know. Of course, I think he needs to be really careful now, because the judge made clear decisions that he's no longer. He can no longer,
Satoshi.
pretend to be Satoshi, but also he can no longer like harass people in the legal system.
At least not in the UK or in the
Yeah,
US.
maybe that was only UK, and he has other cases in the US. I don't know, but I'm also not interested too much to see the details. Yeah, it's done for me.
Yeah. Also, there's something I've been thinking of that in 2015, I moved to Japan to work with Nicolas Dorier. And I was telling Nicolas Dorier, he was writing the C# .NET library.
Mhm.
And I was telling him that what you're doing here is gonna have like a ripple effect, right? As Bitcoin takes over the world, everyone is going to use the code that you're writing right now. And here we are in 2025, 10 years later, and now that feeling is not there anymore. That every single line of code that you're writing is going to make like a huge ripple effect, a huge impact. It's just so many people come in, it become mainstream. We already won.
You're right. It's mainstream, but still, the time I worked on Bitcoin Core, I kind of realized it's really important, every line of code you write, and I think it's still the case. Of course, people got used to the size the network has become, or the community has become, but it's still, for me, when I first started, I think my first pull request was in 2013. That was after like 2 years following the project as a listener. Back then, no one cared, right? No one knew actually what Bitcoin was. And now it's like, the president of the States talks about Bitcoin, which is still totally unreal for me.
Totally unreal. Yeah. Imagine someone telling you in 2013 that the US president is going to launch a shit coin, a meme coin.
Yeah, I would have not believed.
There weren't even meme coins then.
Yeah.
We wouldn't even know what a meme coin is.
I remember people predicting an exchange rate of $1,000 per coin, and I was like just laughing. And now see where we are. It's crazy.
Yeah. Another thing interesting to follow through Bitcoin over the years is that you get a sense of what these big numbers are, right? When someone is talking to you about, let's say, wow, $1 million company or something like that, and you're just looking at, yeah, that's not big money.
Mm.
For compared to like how much, when was Bitcoin $1 million market cap, right? Like a long time ago. Anyway, let me move back the conversation to health a little bit. We talked about diet, but I want to talk about in a more practical way. So what do you actually eat? Like
Mm.
how does a day in life look like for you in terms of diet?
That's a really good point. I think, health goes way beyond nutrition. Nutrition is just one of the pillars. We can talk about the other pillars later. But nutrition is an important one, maybe not the most important, but an important one. So maybe closing the discussion we had before about animals and, veganism. One important point is even if you eat, a bread or a broccoli, there's animal pain involved, because someone needs to, make the fields ready and, harvest the broccoli, whatever. There's always rodents and insects and whatnot killed. So this is an important point people sometimes bring in, veganism or killing more animals. So I looked at all the numbers, all the studies, and of course, if you're always inflicting pain in the realm of animals, regardless what you do. Even if you walk, you probably stand on a fly or whatnot. But I came to the conclusion, if you eat, let's say, if you eat a piece of beef, that beef, that cow has been fed, maybe with soy, maybe with grass, depending on where you buy it from. And it's just, why not eat what the calf or the cow eat in the first place yourself? Of course, people come then up with, they graze just grass. We cannot eat grass. But actually, that's not true. I'm from Switzerland originally. I saw how the cows are fed, Of course, they mow the grass and then in the winter they give the grass. But even the additional fodder they have to give them to have no nutritional deficiency regulated by the law. There's a lot of additional food they need to give to the animals in order to make the meat healthy. And that feed they give to the cows is way more than you would need to eat in relation to the meat you eat. So regardless, let's go back to the situation. What do I eat in a day? So my main sources of protein, as an example, which is important, is basically soy. I eat a lot of soy milk. I make my own soy yogurt, which is like fermented products, which everyone should eat. Either, fermented kimchi, fermented yogurt, dairy yogurts. That's really, I would say, at least 1 to 2 servings a day should be fermented. And for me, it's fermented yogurt. I eat kind of a whole jar, 500-600 grams a day. Usually my morning is a big muesli, I call it, coming from Switzerland. It's just yogurt, seeds.
We call it muesli as well.
Right, yogurt, a lot of berries, some fruits, maybe bananas, a lot of nuts and seeds. I usually, especially when I'm working out, I put a scoop of protein powder into it. So it boosts it maybe from 30 grams of protein to maybe
Sort of
70.
yeah.
Yeah, just pure pea protein.
Oh, pea protein.
Yeah. This is my breakfast. So I get probably around 800 calories, 70 grams of protein. That's just a great start of my day. A lot of, deep nutritional foods like hemp seeds, walnuts, almonds, the yogurt, the fruits. This is kind of my main meal of the day. And usually I eat a slice or two of bread, which I create my own sourdough whole grain bread. I try to use only whole grains. Sometimes I'm mixing some white flour just to get a bit more taste. Allows me to eat more calories. But yeah, and then fruits, vegetables during the day. Sometimes I snack some carrots or some hummus, canned beans, tofu, sometimes pastas, ideally whole grain pastas. If I need to eat more, I eat just normal organic pastas. Yeah, a lot of variety. I eat a lot. Man, I can tell you, I'm eating a lot. That's one of the benefits, in my opinion, of plant-based diets. You can have like a full plate of a lot of stuff and you actually feel full, but the calories are still in check.
What's your supplement stock is like?
Oh yeah. So second pillar. So first pillar, nutrition. Second pillar, of course, there's others. That's not in a row, but an important pillar is supplements. I have a huge supplement stack, but that's not just to offset my diet limits. Of course it is, but it's also like to
How many pills a day?
it's not that much pills. Maybe it's just counting, maybe 12 to 14 pills, capsules, and some juices. You know, I drink one juice powder and usually one protein shake, two, and the rest are capsules. Yeah. I think the value, the longevity, long-term health benefits of most capsules are probably little compared to other interventions. But still, of course, there's some important supplements I would suggest everyone to take regardless of diets.
Well, technology is getting better. Supplement technology is getting better faster than the food technology is. So it's going to be more and more important to take the supplements because the supplements are getting better, you know.
Yes, no, totally agree. The outlook, there's possible scenarios where how the next decades can play off. My current most likely scenario is that we get within the next 10 to 20 years, we get into a different level of healthcare, of longevity interventions together with science, AI, and all the technologies that are coming up. Maybe even we achieve to reverse aging, which in my opinion is totally possible, or at least like bring it to a very slow pace, how you age. So for me now, it's really important to stay as much to keep my health as good as possible for the next 20 years. That's my current focus. So what can I do to be at best health for the next 20 years? And I truly believe, genuinely believe that in 20 years we're at a completely different point of what we can do.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so. Maybe you can travel to Prospera to get some gene therapies or stuff like that. Then,
Possible.
yeah. How do you sleep at night?
Yeah, sleep is, I would say, it's maybe the most like I'm back and forth between what's the most important pillar of health and longevity and well-being. I'd say sleep is either the top one or comes right after exercise. But sleep is really deeply important. My sleep is not perfect, but it's pretty good. I measure it every night and I'm still struggling with getting more deep sleep, but I'm getting decent amount of sleep. So in time and in quality. And I think what's really important for me is I have like a really set sleep rhythm. I always go to bed at the same time and wake up the same time every day, including the weekends. I like to have it dark.
What's the error rate? What's the error rate there? Like how much
Yeah.
minutes is it the same time every day?
No, of
We
course, there's always
10 p.m.
some variation. It's actually 10 p.m.
There are people who do
I
that.
know there's all sorts of people, but it's actually 10 p.m. Sometimes if I'm really tired, I go 9 p.m. Sometimes it's maybe 10:30. But if it's 11 o'clock, it almost never happens. Then I'm like 11 o'clock. And yeah.
Yeah, it actually reduces your resilience a lot because I've been so previously I was sleeping in a way that I went to sleep, I woke up, and then I stayed awake as long as I could or as long as I wanted to, and then I went to sleep. I woke up and I ended up like sometimes going to sleep at 9 a.m. in the morning, right? Because that's how it shifted for me. But now I'm going to sleep properly for maybe 5 years already, and I just realized that even just staying up until 11, it's so hard for me when I'm going to, let's say, travel around the world and in the middle of the night, right? Which is not the middle of the night, but I'm passing out in the middle of the airport, you know?
Yeah. No, traveling and good sleep, of course, is really hard, especially if you like travel through a few time zones. And it happened to me. I'm constantly switching, not constantly, but I switch a few times a year time zones, and it really messes up the sleep. But there's a few tricks, and sunlight, and food, eat the intervals and stuff that helps. But of course, maybe you suffer for a week, but there's no excuse to not have a clear sleep rhythm. I think sleep rhythm and good sleep and no phones in bedroom, and cold bedroom and dark bedroom. It's just the best you can do for your whole well-being. And if you're energized in the morning, your home hormones are producing, you're just a better human, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Tell me about the pillars. You said you have created yourself a system, didn't you?
Yeah, so
Romer, of course you did.
there's pillars, right? So pillars for, I mean, you can call it longevity, you can call it health. For me, it's just about how I feel and how I'm motivated now and in the future. So this is actually my goal. I just want to feel good now and in the future. And I try to prevent myself from having, especially later in life, pain. This is actually what I'm trying to eliminate. A lot of old people have pain, mental, physical. They cannot stand up from a chair. All sorts. They have maybe a heart attack. Suffering and pain is what I'm trying to prevent now and in the future. So then there's a few pillars. We call it goal health or goal longevity or goal long being. So I think one of the most crucial pillars is exercise. We haven't touched on. We can sleep, really important one. Nutrition, really important one. And then of course there's the philosophical, spiritual pillar, and then the community, social interactions. So we are social animals, so that also deserves a pillar. I think these are the main ones. Of course, people sometimes have other strategies, but that's my strategy.
What's your exercise strategy?
Yeah, as I said, exercise, it's probably the most or second most important intervention. So sometimes people tell me, yeah, well, I don't need to be fit to feel good. I don't need to be fit to be healthy. I think they really underestimate the impact of being fit and just working out. And there's, especially the older you get, especially as a male, but also for females, hormones play an important role in how you feel and how's your drive for tackling new things you want to do in life. And just resistance training is really important for me, work with weights. So you're like, A, feeling good, and B, you have the hormonal production you need to actually be ready and be in life and be happy. So for me, my program is mostly 2 to 3 times resistance training with weights, basic gym stuff. And I also do cardio and high intensity. That's the 3 things I do. And of course I stretch. I try to stretch every day, but mostly it's maybe every second day. And of course, it always depends how much time you want to invest. It needs a lot of time, and it's probably the least easiest of the pillars we discussed. I would say it's the hardest in terms of time and effort they need to invest. But that's also maybe why it's the most important one.
You do something unusual people don't tend to do.
Well, I think I do the normal stuff because I mean, how I do it, that works for me, and I think works for a lot of people. I hate gyms. I never went to a gym. I cannot actually go to a gym. I don't like the people there. I don't like the vibe there. It's just not my thing. So you can invest how I did, $300-400 or Swiss francs or whatever. I buy a few weights, buy a bench, buy a rack, and you're good to go. You don't need like 100 machines to be healthy. You just need a $400 equipment, and that's absolutely bringing you to 95% of what you and what you need to feel good. So I think people sometimes overstress themselves, like, oh, 9 o'clock in the evening, I need to go to the gym now. No, if you have stuff at home, invest 30 minutes and you're good. And afterwards you can watch TV. It's actually pretty easy if you free yourself from the type of workout most people do. At the end, it only matters that you stress your muscles. You got to bring your muscles to fatigue, however you want to do it. And there's so many ways. And I really enjoy working out because it makes me feel good. There's the aesthetics aspect. If you look good, if you're happy with your body, you're happy with yourself. There's all sorts of benefits from an exercise.
I'm a huge fan of home gyms as well. One of the main thing that I figured out that if I don't have to commute to go to the gym, then I'm much more likely to do it. And I have a consistency for the past 5 years. I can't even believe how consistent I am with working out.
Yeah, I mean, if I would need to, commute 30 minutes to a gym, I would probably not do it because it's just,
Yeah.
I don't like to commute, and it's actually so easy at home. You can even do it without weights, but of course, weights helps a lot.
Let's talk a bit about longevity. From Bitcoin, I moved into the longevity circles. And in that, I'm trying to grab a niche, making a sport out of longevity. So people could compete with each other. You're welcome to compete in the Longevity World Cup, which I just launched. You mentioned the reduction of pain, and just 2 days ago, I ended up in a rabbit hole of the last stands rabbit hole. Think about any anime character that is going against the big boss without any chances, but he's taking his last stand, or the Viking on the bridge. I'm not sure what was its name, but there is this fantasy of men that they wanna have their last stand, they want to be the ones who protect their values by sacrificing themselves. And the more and more I watch these videos, the more I realize that how much this entire thing is missing and in conflict with all the longevity attempts that people are doing and philosophies
You mean the last stand with, fighting for humanity or fighting for your own?
for anything,
For,
fighting for anything,
yeah. No,
sacrificing yourself for the greater good.
yeah, I think it's a really noble attempt. And yeah, I totally see it. And I think a lot of people are trying to do that last stance, and I think it's cool. I'm also happy to participate in your speed of aging World Cup, although I never measure my speed of aging. I probably need to look at it.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. Two things. There is the Rejuvenation Olympics that's created by Brian Johnson and True Diagnostic. And there is the Longevity World Cup, which I just created. It's still in beta, but you can already apply. And the Rejuvenation Olympics, that's where you need speed of aging test
Mhm.
through diagnostic. For the Longevity World Cup, you need a blood test with specific biomarkers. And from those biomarkers, we can calculate your biological age,
Sure.
quotation mark biological age, because I don't want to lie that it's like it's your biological age. Funny thing of being a programmer and in this longevity field is that writes the code of this well-known longevity biological age algorithm, and I just noticed things like, no, are we really doing this? Anyway,
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I think I did some blood tests that were like giving me a biological age. I'm not sure about how valuable they are, but of course it's about cholesterol levels, it's about albumin and about testosterone and all the things, and then you mix it together. It's probably a good way. But I think it's, yeah. What's your thought about the Horvath clock and the Horvath measurement DNA?
so the Horvath clock was the very first one, right? I think there is Horvath 2, which is second generation biological aging clock. What I'm using, the second generation biological aging clock as well, I'm using PhenoAge, and that can be calculated from specific blood biomarkers. But there is a third generation, which is the company that is doing that is saying that that's the third generation, right? Which is the Dunedin pace. And I do believe them that that's better than anything else. But, what do I know? I'm just a programmer. So what's my thinking there? This is an emerging field, right? And we are able to measure aging better and better and better. And a measurement is what we are missing for interventions to test against,
Mhm.
right? So if we are getting better and better measurements, we can test interventions against those measurements. And then we might be able to say something about quantify, is it cold plunge or sauna or
Mhm.
this diet or this exercise, right? Because right now we're just, it's more of a guessing game.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, that's
totally.
my thinking there.
Yeah, totally. I think you need to have a measurement method to actually test all your interventions against. My question is just more, is it just looking at your blood or DNA, or should it also include, strength, body fat, other markers that may have also an impact on your next 40 decades. Maybe it could be more, but I totally get it. There needs to be measurement methods so we know what works, what not. But that's also one problem of the longevity field. A lot of science gets applied. If you look at Brian Johnson, he applies a lot of scientific knowledge into his own regimen. But on the other hand, he's not producing any scientific evidence, right? Because He's he's an N of one, so N means the amount of subjects in the study. So he's just one guy, and that's not representative for the rest of the people. And then he's doing like 100 interventions at the same time. So it's really impossible then to say it was the cold plunge or it was the red light therapy. So we don't know. But it's not a criticism. It's just how it is, and I think it's valid to do that. But in order to produce more science, it just takes decades, right, for all these interventions to that we know what works and what not.
He's also not sharing as many things that he claims he's sharing. It would be great if he would share all his measurements, but he's not.
Mhm.
Once I wanted to compare my spirometry results with his because I saw he was doing spirometry on YouTube, but then there were nowhere to be found. So
Yeah, maybe he shares only the things that are in check. You never know, right? But I like him, and I think he's doing a great favor. He's doing a great favor, and it's just there's for the general public, there's only a few things you need to do in order to feel and live better. And even if you don't need to do it like Brian Johnson does it, but there's just a few things. If people would do it, they would just feel much better. And of course, then his Don't Die movement, it's also kind of really great philosophical aspect for the next century.
it could be. It could be. So, don't die. So philosophers have been trying to figure out what's the point of life, right? For a very long time. And he was not the first one who figured out that it should be avoidance of death or avoidance of suffering or pursuit of happiness, pursuit of meaning. I believe it's the pursuit of value. But the thing is that there are, like, I would love him if he would engage with actual philosophical canon of the world regarding that, in order for that movement to for me to take it seriously from philosophical point of view.
Yeah,
But I love what he's doing in general.
I haven't really read into his philosophy. I remember buying that book or downloading the book, Don't Die, but I haven't read it. But just the idea that we are, you know, eating that crappy food and, having that sedentary lifestyle and just waking up and thinking, why do I do that? Why do I kill myself consciously or bringing myself faster to death? I think I like it, but of course there needs to be more depth to it in order to make sense. And I don't know if it's there or not.
Yeah, he has some interesting ideas about every calorie has to fight for its life, or defining someone offering you a cookie as a microaggression against you.
Of course, he's an extremist, and I think at some point not everyone can be. But that's always the pioneers of every field, needs to be double extreme, right?
Just like in early Bitcoin days. Well, let me ask you my final questions. What's one thing that you strongly believe to be the case, but very few people agrees with you on?
Hmm. It's a good point, I think it's not an important one, but it's one that a lot of people disagree with me, but I think they are wrong. People claiming seed oils are bad for your health. I'm not a seed oil fan, but I just think it's a ridiculous claim, and I don't think it has merit. Yeah, maybe that one. Of course, a lot of people disagree with plant-based diets are healthy, and I think there's just a big spectrum. I of course can say a good plant-based diet is really healthy for you, but then there's also bad plant-based diets, and spectrum is too big to actually tell people it's always good.
So the reason why I don't have like a carnivore belief or a vegan belief or something like that, because I've been following the most skeptical nutritional advice people that there are, right? Like to an unknowingly extent skeptical. But for example, you can see when these quant people, quantifying everything, these people who are going down to the research and breaking it down to you that yeah, this seed oil stuff is coming from epidemiological research or whatnot. The kind of research those are like the worst of the worst kind. And what I was able to gather on the seed oil thing is that it's either good for you, but what you have to pay attention to is to not fry stuff with it. You can sometimes get away with frying it in some contexts, but like buying something from a Chinese. I lived in Taiwan, right? So that's my first thing to go buying some fried stuff from a Chinese street vendor, right? Which is which is refrying the seed oil, the
Mhm.
thing that you're going to do. That will create trans fatty acids, and that's terrible, right? So
Yeah.
that's the danger of seed oil in my
No, totally.
first time.
So we touched on CEDOs, which is a very controversial topic. So it might get us into troubles, but I totally agree. So the thing is, in science, there's a hierarchy of evidence. There's the randomized controlled trials, which is the gold standard, and then there's the epidemical studies and intervention studies. There's a kind of a hierarchy of evidence, and on the top, the evidence has more weight than on the bottom. And actually, seed oils has been looked through all the layers of evidence within the last 40 years. And there's mixed results in all the studies, but there is a clear signal when you combine all the studies in meta studies, or if you combine even meta studies, you get a very clear picture of what science thinks of seed oils. And of course, it is again a replacement thing. If you consume seed oils instead of what, or if you not consume seed oils, what would you then consume elsewhere? It's always what do you replace it with? But the thing is, if you replace saturated fat above 10% with seed oils, you probably get into you probably get into a state where it's beneficial for your health.
Okay, last question. Is there some project that you are currently working on and would like people to look into that, to retweet you on Twitter, to star your GitHub project, whatever that you have?
It's not yet there, but I'm working on a e-ink based screen project that can be used to display various types of information, also relevant to Bitcoin informations. But it's not there yet. But pay attention. It's coming soon. It's a screen technology that, have you ever had an e-reader, a Kindle in your hand? It's a type of screen.
No, I did not.
It's a type of screen where you can unpower it, and there's still the image is still on the screen, and it doesn't need so it's actually moving particles rather than emitting light. And I think it's just a beautiful type of screen, and it doesn't require energy when it's powered off, and there's no light, so it can be in bedrooms and wherever. It's just extraordinary technology, and I'm working on a product that embeds those screens into a display signage project.
All right, that's interesting. Well, Jonas Schnelli, Bitcoin core developer legend and now fitness influencer. Thank you for coming.
Was a pleasure. Thank you, Adam.